If you use Mandarin for work or business, you have probably had this moment. You are in a meeting, you understand most of what's being said, maybe 70–80%. You catch the keywords, you follow the topic. But then someone finished speaking and you are not sure what that sentence just did. Was that a question? Was it rhetorical? Are you supposed to respond? Or was just wrapping up? Is silence agreement or is silence rude? You hesitate, not because you didn't hear it, not because you don't know the vocabulary. You hesitate because you don't know what that sentence means for you in that moment. And whilst you are working that out, someone else speaks. The conversation moves, and you are left wondering whether you just missed something important or whether you were never meant to respond at all. Later, you explain it to yourself. Chinese communication is indirect. You have to read between the lines. It's cultural. But here's the thing. The exact same confusion happens in English. You just don't call in that. In English, when you hesitate like this, it gets labeled differently. It's not the language. It's not the culture. It's personality. Confidence, presence, initiative. Same gap, different explanation. And the label is stopping you from fixing the right thing. Let me give you an example. You are in a meeting, everyone's speaking English or whatever your first language is. A colleague is presenting a plan. It involves some risk. The timeline's tight. There are dependencies. They finish the walkthrough and says, "So, are we comfortable with this?" Now, you understand the sentences, obviously, but you don't know what it's doing. Is this a real question or is it a formality? If you raise a concern, will that be seen as a useful pushback or as slowing the things down? Is this an invitation to disagree or is them to checking that no one is going to block it? You are not confused about the content. You are confused about the function. So you wait just a bit, just long enough to see how the room reads it. And in that bit, someone else speaks. They said, "Yeah, I think we're all good." Another person nods. The presenter says, "Great, let's move forward then." The default assumption starts settling. If you step in now, you are not adding to an open question, but you are asking the room to reopen something it's already started closing. So you stay quiet, or you say something softer than you mean to, or you bring it up afterwards, one-to-one, and it doesn't carry the same weight. Later, in feedback, it gets described like this. You need to be more decisive, show more ownership, speak up earlier in the conversation. And you take that on board because it makes sense. You did hesitate. You could have been quicker. But the truth is, you weren't slow because you lack of confidence. You were slow because you were trying to read the situation correctly. You didn't want to misjudge the function of that sentence and respond in the wrong register. The gap wasn't speed, it was interpretation. In your first language, this kind of interpretive uncertainty happens all the time, but you don't notice it as a language problem because the language itself is automated. You are not translating, you are not parsing grammar, you are not checking tones. All of that runs in the background. So when you feel uncertain, it doesn't feel like a comprehension issue. It feels like a judgment call. And judgment call gets explained as a personality traits, not language gaps. I should have been more assertive. I should have read the room better. I need to work on my executive presence. All of these are explanations that keeps the problems inside you. They frame hesitation as a character issue, not a structure one. And because your first language is so automated, you can afford to hesitate without it feel like a breakdown. You are still participating. You are still tracking. You are still just holding back a bit. The system tolerates it. So you tolerate it in yourself. But the tolerance hides something important. The interpretive gap was always there. You're always guessing, at least a little, about what the sentences were doing. You just didn't have to name it. Let's replay that meeting in Mandarin. Same structure, a colleague presents a plan. There's a risk involved. Time is tight. They finished and say something like, 你们觉得怎么样? How do you feel? You understand it. You know what the words mean. What do you think? Simple enough. But again, you don't know what's doing. Is this asking for your opinion? Or is it checking whether anyone's disagree? In this context, does it mean I think this won't work? Or I think this could work? Or is it just a procedure question? If you raise a concern now, is that contributing or is that being difficult? You hesitate, same reason as before. You are trying to interpret the function. But this time, the hesitation is louder because you are also doing other things. You are checking your comprehension. You are making sure you didn't miss a key phrase. You are wondering if there's a word you don't know that could clarify the tone. And whilst you are doing all of that, someone else responds, 可以，没问题. That's fine, no problem. Another person agrees. The presenter moves on. Same pattern, same result. But this time, you explain it differently. My Mandarin isn't good enough yet. I'm missing something cultural. Chinese people are more indirect. I need to learn to read in between the lines. The structure of situation is identical. The interpretive gap is identical. The hesitation is identical. Only the explanation has changed. In English, it was personality. In Mandarin, it's language and culture. You see, Mandarin doesn't create the problem, it makes it visible. In your first language, interpretation happens so fast that you don't notice it as a separate step. You hear a sentence and you just know, or you think you know what it's doing. That automation lets you act quickly, even when you are not certain. In Mandarin, that automation is gone. You have to interpret more deliberately. You have to check your understanding. You have to notice things that were invisible before. Tones of voice, word order, who spoke, when they spoke, what they didn't say. All of that takes time. And in a meeting, time is the thing you don't have. So the interpretive gap that was always in English, the gap between hearing a sentence and knowing what to do with it, has become impossible to ignore in Mandarin. And here's the other thing. AI doesn't help with this. You can use AI to translate the meeting afterwards. You can get a full transcript. You can understand every single word. But that still doesn't tell you what 你们觉得怎么样, what do you think, was doing in that specific moment, in that specific room, with that specific people. Was it asking for input? Was it a formality? Was it testing to objections? Was it simply concerns? Translation gives you content. It doesn't give you function. It can tell you what was said. It can't tell you what you were supposed to do with it. And function is what you need in the moment. So, if Mandarin doesn't create the problem and AI doesn't solve it, what's actually happening? Mandarin is training something that your first language let you skip. The ability to judge intent before you have full clarity. In English, you could act quickly because interpretation felt instant. You trusted your read of the situation, even that read was partial or guessed. In Mandarin, you can't do that yet. The interpretation is slower, more effortful, more visible. So you wait, you check, you second guess. And that feels like a step backwards. It feels like you have lost something. But actually, you are training something new. You are learning to notice the gap between understanding words and understanding function. You are learning to act when you are not certain. You are learning to judge what a sentence is doing, not just what it says. That's not a language skill, that's a judgment skill. And the strange thing is, once you start training in Mandarin, it transfers back. You start noticing the same gap in English, the same interpretive uncertainty, the same moments where you are guessing what someone meant, or what they want, or whether you are supposed to respond. You start seeing that being more decisive wasn't actually about speed. It was about acting under uncertainty. And read the room wasn't about intuition. It was about interpreting function without full information. All the things you were told to work on English, they weren't personality traits. They were interpretive skills, and Mandarin is forcing you to train them deliberately. So here's the reframe. Mandarin doesn't make communication harder because Chinese people are indirect, or because the culture is different, or because you have to read between the lines. Mandarin makes communication harder because it removes the automation that let you act quickly in your first language. And in doing so, it shows you something you weren't seen before, that you were always interpreting, you're always guessing, you're always acting without full certainty. You just don't have to notice it. In English, that interpretive work was invisible. So when you hesitated, it got explained as a personality issue. Confidence, presence, initiative. In Mandarin, that interpretive work is visible. So when you hesitate, it gets explained as a language issue, vocabulary, culture, indirectness. Same gap, different label. And once you see that, the whole thing shifts. You stop treating Mandarin as a translation problem. You stop waiting until your Mandarin is good enough to contribute. You stop thinking that fluency will make the interpretive gap disappear, because it won't. The gap exists in every language. Fluency just makes it invisible again. What Mandarin is actually training is your ability to act whilst the gap is still visible, to interpret function under uncertainty, to judge intent without waiting for full clarity. And that skill transferred not just back to English, but to every situation where you have to make a call without all the information, which, if we are honest, is most of them. If you like this video, please click the like button below and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you next video. Bye.